My daughter said, "Dad, we canceled the flight. You don't need to go to Florida anymore." Melissa said it while still tapping on her phone. She never even looked at me. Her voice was flat, like she was casually mentioning tomorrow's weather forecast. I froze in the middle of the living room. My fingers tightened around the freshly printed boarding pass. Tampa. The trip I had planned for 2 whole months to visit Samuel, my old war buddy. My suitcase was packed. I had even put on my cleanest pressed shirt. But my daughter erased the entire trip with one tap on her screen. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge Real Life. Grab a drink, some snacks, sit back and remember this: the people in these stories always had every chance to do the right thing. They simply chose wrong. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment number 1 so we can begin today's story. At that moment, my chest tightened. I looked at Melissa. She kept scrolling like nothing happened. My son-in-law Ryan walked out of the kitchen carrying my coffee mug. He took a sip from it and nodded in agreement with his wife. Ryan said a storm was coming to Tampa. They only did this because they cared about my health. They said they wanted to protect me. Protect. That was always their favorite word. They used it to justify every controlling decision. They gave themselves permission to manage my entire life. I was 70 years old. I built this house with my own hands. I used to lead a crew of over a dozen carpenters. Now I felt like a child inside my own home. I was no longer allowed to decide where I could go. The boarding pass in my hand suddenly became worthless. Just another useless piece of paper. Anger crawled slowly up my spine. But I did not yell. I did not argue. 15 years in carpentry taught me restraint. When a plank bends out of shape, you do not smash it apart with a hammer. You find a way to bend it back. I looked straight into Melissa's eyes. She finally glanced up, slightly startled by my silence. Slowly, I slipped the ticket into my shirt pocket. Then I turned around and walked away. I did not say another word, but inside my head, a clock had already started counting down. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally gained control over this old man. They were wrong. This was not surrender. This was the beginning of my revenge. I walked toward my old bedroom. Every step across the wooden floor sent dry creaks echoing through the house. I built this place with my own hands. Every beam, every brick, every nail carried my sweat. Yet now, somehow, I felt like a guest renting space inside my own home. The past 26 months had been a slow invasion. Quiet, careful, like a parasite feeding on my freedom from the inside out. At first, it started with Melissa's sweet suggestions about moving in together so they could take care of me. I let my guard down. I thought it was love, family loyalty, a daughter wanting to protect her father. I was wrong. The changes came little by little, like water carving through stone. First, it was the mailbox. Ryan replaced the lock without asking and kept the only key. He said it would make paying the bills easier if he handled everything himself. Then Melissa moved my blood pressure medication into her kitchen cabinet. Every morning she counted the pills into my hand one by one like she was rationing supplies to a prisoner. Even my grocery list became something they controlled. One afternoon I wrote down steak. Melissa crossed it out with a pen. She said old people should not eat too much protein. That control happened every single day. Small, constant, smothering. Always disguised as love. Little by little, I began feeling less like a man and more like a fossil sitting inside a museum display built from my own life. But the thing that truly tightened around my heart was what happened to Margaret. My wife had been gone for 3 years. The only thing left of her in the living room was an old striped velvet armchair. She spent 30 years sitting there reading books beneath the evening lamp. Whenever I looked at that chair, I could still see her. One afternoon, I came home from a walk and the chair was gone. I found it abandoned in the dark corner of the basement storage room. When I asked about it, Ryan answered without a hint of guilt. He said the chair looked outdated. He said it got in the children's way. His voice was casual, but those words crushed every memory I had left. They were not just trying to control my present anymore. They were trying to erase my past. I sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at the empty room. Frustration twisted inside my throat until I could barely breathe. I had tolerated too much for too long. I had mistaken politeness for peace. My daughter and her husband believed this old man no longer had any teeth left. They thought I would stay quiet and grow old exactly the way they wanted. But they forgot something important. I was a carpenter, and a good carpenter always knows to wait for the wood grain to settle before making the first cut. Melissa thought she was helping me. But the next night, as I passed their bedroom door, I accidentally overheard them discussing plans to sell the house I had lived in my entire life, as if I were already gone. That sentence shattered the last piece of patience I had left inside me. And that was the moment the plan began. The first move of my revenge would start in a place they would never expect. That night I could not sleep. The conversation about selling my house kept replaying inside my head over and over again. Every word sounded like a hammer driving nails straight into my skull. I sat alone in the darkness of my bedroom. The silence around me felt almost unnatural. Moonlight spilled weakly across the stained walls through the window. My mind drifted backward into the past, back to the years when Margaret was still beside me. I remembered the way she sat in that armchair every evening with a book resting in her lap. I remembered her voice, soft, calm, yet always firm when it needed to be. And then inside that crushing silence I almost heard her whisper. It felt as if Margaret's voice had reached across the void itself. One sentence she told me years ago suddenly echoed through my mind with painful clarity. "Thomas, since when did you become a houseplant?" The question hit me like a slap across the face. It woke me up from a long sleep I never realized I was trapped inside. A houseplant. She was right. For 26 months I had lived exactly like one. People watered me, so I stayed alive. People trimmed my branches, and I accepted it. People shoved me into dark corners, and I stayed quiet. I had been too polite, too weak beneath the fake kindness and false devotion my daughter wrapped around me like chains. That realization lit a fire inside my chest. I was not a decoration sitting silently in someone else's living room. I was a man. Blood still ran through my veins. These hands once built an entire life from nothing but wood sweat and determination. This house existed because of me. And suddenly I understood my greatest mistake. I had traded my freedom for fake peace. My silence had not created respect. It had only fed their arrogance, their greed. Piece by piece, my identity had been buried beneath Ryan's lectures and Melissa's constant control. But not anymore. I would not allow them to write the final chapter of my life for me. I stood up and walked toward the closet. My hands searched through the darkness until my fingers brushed against familiar fabric. The blue shirt. Margaret's favorite. The shirt I wore on the most important days of my life. Slowly, I pulled it out and hung it carefully by the door. Tomorrow I would wear it again, because a plan had already formed inside my mind, and the first step would strike directly at Melissa and Ryan's smug certainty. I knew exactly where I needed to go at sunrise. That place held the key to my freedom, and it was also where my daughter's true face would finally be exposed. The next morning I woke before sunrise. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of Margaret's blue shirt. That shade of blue always gave me a strange feeling of peace mixed with strength, like wearing armor stitched together from old memories. I left the house quietly while the children were still asleep. My destination was Independence Bank, the place where I had trusted the savings of my entire lifetime. The cold air from the lobby vents hit my face as I stepped through the tall glass doors. I walked directly to the service counter and asked to review every account under my name. The young teller looked at me with a strange expression, almost pity. Then she quietly escorted me into the branch manager's private office. The moment I sat down in that leather chair, I felt it. Something was wrong. The manager slid a thick stack of documents across the desk toward me. I turned the pages slowly, and my heart nearly stopped. Rage rose inside my chest until it clogged my throat. For 18 months, Melissa had secretly installed online access permissions to every single one of my bank accounts. She had changed all paper statements into electronic delivery. That explained why my mailbox outside had stayed empty for so long. She had been controlling my money completely. Every dollar I spent, every transaction I made, every withdrawal. She could see all of it. Worse than that, she had even placed cash withdrawal restrictions on my accounts without my direct approval. This was no longer concern. This was betrayal. My own daughter, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders. The child I protected my entire life. Now she viewed me as some helpless old man who needed supervision. They were trying to turn me into someone completely dependent on them. I took a deep breath to stop my hands from shaking. Then I looked directly at the branch manager, with the cold determination of a man who had survived storms for more than half a century. I demanded that every unknown device immediately lose access to my accounts. I reset every PIN number connected to my cards. I redirected all account alerts and balance notifications to a private phone number, a number I had secretly purchased the week before. One door closed, and financial control returned to my hands. When the final paperwork was complete, I signed my name with firm, steady strokes across the bottom of the documents. Then I walked out of the bank beneath the bright morning sun. For the first time in months, my chest felt lighter. It was only a small step, but it was the first real victory. Still, I understood something clearly. Money was only part of the problem. My house, my freedom, my future. Those were the things truly at stake. When I returned home, Melissa and Ryan were sitting at the kitchen table pretending nothing had happened. Calm, comfortable, completely unaware that the control they held over me had just been severed. But I did not go upstairs to my bedroom. Instead, I walked straight toward the basement door. For 2 years, Melissa had forbidden me from going down there. She always claimed it was too dangerous for an old man. I wrapped my hand around the dusty wooden handle and slowly pushed the door open, because hidden behind that door was something waiting for me. Something that would help me reclaim the man I used to be and prepare the next strike they would never see coming. I walked down the steep wooden stairs leading into the basement. The air was damp and heavy with the smell of ancient dust. Melissa always claimed this place was dangerous. She said the stairs were too steep and the floor too slippery for an old man. But I knew the real reason. They did not want me touching my past. They did not want me remembering who I used to be. I flipped the light switch. Weak yellow light spread across the basement, pushing back the darkness just enough for me to see. I walked straight toward the corner where Ryan had dumped Margaret's armchair. The old striped velvet chair still sat there beside stacks of forgotten cardboard boxes. Abandoned, just like the memories attached to it. I moved past the clutter until I reached my workbench. 2 years. It had been 2 years since I stood in this exact spot. I brushed my palm across the thick layer of dust covering the walnut surface. Slowly, the rich wood grain emerged beneath my hand, sharp lines twisting through dark brown patterns like veins beneath skin. Walnut was strong wood, stubborn wood. It demanded precision, patience, confidence. A weak hand could ruin it forever. As my fingers traced, the grain warmth traveled from my palm straight into my chest. The smell of wood oil, dry lumber, and years of hard labor filled my lungs. And suddenly it felt like I remembered my own name again. I was not some confused old man waiting to be managed. I was Thomas Bennett, master carpenter. I reached for the handsaw hanging on the wall. The steel blade still gleamed beneath its thin coat of oil from the day I closed this workshop for the last time. I grabbed a spare piece of wood and made the first cut. Shk, 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 shk. The steady rhythm echoed through the basement, and with every pull of the saw, my thoughts became clearer. Carpentry had taught me how to transform rough, broken timber into something beautiful. Now I would use that same patience and discipline to rebuild my own life. I would fix the mistakes I had tolerated for too long. Melissa wanted to sell this house. They wanted to shove me into a nursing home so they could spend my money freely without inconvenience. That would never happen. I placed the saw back on the table and stared into the dim basement light. The preparation stage of my plan was complete. I already knew the next step. Money in the bank was protected now. But this house needed something stronger. Permanent legal protection. I pulled out my phone and searched through an old contact list I had not touched in years. Leonard Harris, a seasoned attorney, and an old family friend. This phone call would change the entire balance of power. I needed to meet him tomorrow morning in a quiet private office. Because I was about to make a decision so unexpected that Melissa and Ryan would never see it coming. Not even in their worst nightmares. The next morning I left the house early and drove downtown to a blue glass office tower rising above the city streets. Leonard Harris's law office was on the 12th floor. The moment I stepped through the heavy oak doors, the familiar smell of paper and printer ink hit me. Leonard greeted me with the tight embrace only old friends understand. Then we sat across from each other in silence for a moment. I did not waste time. I told him immediately that I wanted to change everything regarding my trust fund and inheritance arrangements. Leonard's expression turned serious as he opened the old legal files. According to my previous will, Melissa would inherit everything after my death. The house, the accounts, every piece of property I spent my entire life building. I took a slow breath and stared out the giant office windows overlooking the busy streets below. Then I spoke calmly, but with absolute certainty. I want Melissa completely removed from the inheritance. Leonard looked up sharply. I want this house transferred to my grandson Noah when he turns 21. The decision did not come from hatred. It came from justice. Melissa had chosen to treat me like a problem to manage instead of a father to respect. She no longer deserved the reward of my lifetime of work. Leonard nodded slowly and began typing across his keyboard. He explained that we needed stronger protections than a simple will. He recommended establishing complete living control over all assets while I was still alive. That meant nobody could interfere with my finances, property, or personal decisions under the excuse of guardianship or elderly care. I agreed immediately. This was the legal shield I needed to destroy their plan completely. If you've made it this far, this is the moment justice finally begins. Take one quick second to subscribe. Most people watch without doing it, but it helps us more than you know. And tell me in the comments, do you believe elderly parents deserve the right to control their own lives? When the final pages of the new will slid out of the printer, I picked up the fountain pen resting beside me. 2 legal witnesses stood nearby as I signed my name. Each stroke of ink felt like hammering nails into solid wood. Permanent, final, unshakable. Relief spread slowly through my body. The power was back where it belonged. With me, Melissa and Ryan thought I was nothing more than an old pawn they could move around whenever they pleased. What they did not realize was that they had already been removed from the financial future they believed belonged to them. I placed the stamped copy of the new will inside my leather briefcase, shook Leonard's hand goodbye, and stepped into the elevator. But I knew the hardest part was still ahead. I still had to go back to that house, back to the 2 people pretending they owned my life. And the moment I pushed open the front door, I knew something had changed. Ryan was already waiting in the living room. His face looked dark and furious. In his hands was a stack of banking reports from the linked account notifications. The mask of the so-called caretaker was finally beginning to crack, and the confrontation waiting for me was now unavoidable. Ryan stood in the middle of the living room with his face burning red. One hand held a thick stack of bank reports raised in the air like evidence in a courtroom. Melissa sat stiffly on the sofa beside him, her eyes blazing with anger. The entire room felt like a chamber filled with gunpowder, waiting for a spark. The second I locked the front door behind me, Ryan stormed forward. He demanded to know why I had cut off access to the accounts. He shouted that my actions were irrational, selfish, and ungrateful. According to him, they had wasted the entire morning trying to fix the chaos I caused at the bank. I did not back away. I calmly placed my leather briefcase containing the new will on the table beside me. Then I straightened my back and looked directly into my arrogant son-in-law's eyes. My voice dropped low, cold, sharp. "What gives you the right to manage my money?" Ryan froze for half a second. Then the arrogance returned. He immediately launched into another lecture. He said I was old. He claimed my mind was no longer clear enough to manage finances responsibly. He insisted Melissa only controlled the accounts to protect the house and secure my future. Then he accused me of unfairly punishing my own daughter. Anger crawled slowly up my spine. But I never raised my voice. Instead, I took one slow step closer and looked toward Melissa. My daughter remained silent beside him, quietly agreeing with every word coming out of his mouth. They had grown too comfortable with my patience. They believed fear and guilt would keep me obedient forever. But they were wrong. I stepped directly in front of Ryan until only an arm's length separated us. Then I spoke, and the sentence that left my mouth froze the entire room. Canceling another grown man's plans is not care. It is control. The words landed like an axe, splitting rotten wood in half. Ryan's mouth fell open. Melissa instantly stood up, ready to interrupt me. I raised one hand, and she stopped talking immediately. For the first time in years, the authority of the true owner of this house filled the room again. I looked at both of them carefully. "Listen to me clearly," I said. "The money is mine, this house is mine, and nobody decides how I live except me." Ryan let out a mocking laugh. He said I could keep my money if I wanted, but I still could not go anywhere without their help. Then he smugly reminded me that my Tampa flight had already been canceled. He thought isolation still gave him power over me. He thought I was trapped inside this house. I looked at the smug expression stretched across his face. Then I smiled. Slowly I reached into the pocket of my blue shirt and pulled something out. A small object. I placed it carefully on the table, directly in front of them. The moment they saw it, both of their faces changed instantly. Because sitting on the table was the one thing they never expected me to have. A brand new set of car keys. And in that moment, the real counterattack finally began. The object I placed on the table was not a set of car keys. It was a brand new plane ticket. I had rebooked my flight to Tampa myself at sunrise, and this time they had no way to interfere. Every access point had already been locked down the day before. Melissa stared at the ticket in complete disbelief. Ryan stood frozen beside her. For the first time, both of them understood something terrifying. The absolute control they once held over me was gone. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the front door. Neither of them dared to stop me. A few hours later, I arrived in Florida. The bright Tampa sunlight wrapped around me the moment I stepped out of the airport. Warm ocean wind rushed across my face, carrying away the suffocating pressure that had buried me for the past 26 months. Samuel was waiting near the exit. Still, the same as always. The same booming laugh. The same powerful slap on the shoulder from the soldier I once fought beside decades ago. We drove back to his small beachside house near the water. And for 3 days I rediscovered the taste of freedom. I woke up whenever I wanted. I ate whatever food I craved without someone inspecting my plate like a prison guard. Samuel and I sat on the porch drinking beer while reliving old war stories. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. No one watched me. No one monitored me. No one questioned whether my mind was still functioning properly. The contrast hit me harder with every passing hour. Only then did I fully realize how miserable my life back home had become. On the final night in Tampa, I stood alone on the balcony while waves rolled gently against the shore below. The ocean wind swept through my silver hair as I stared up at the stars, and I thought about Margaret. Quietly, I spoke to my late wife beneath the endless night sky. I should have done this sooner. My voice almost disappeared into the wind. I stayed weak for too long. I let them cage me inside my own life. But things were different now. The strength had returned. The determination of the carpenter inside me had finally awakened again. This trip was never just a vacation. It was a reset. A necessary silence before the final move, because freedom had ignited something powerful inside me. I could no longer share a home with people who fed off my life while pretending it was love. It was time to clean out the house I built with my own hands. The next morning, I packed my bags and prepared to fly home. My mind felt calm, cold, focused. I knew Melissa and Ryan would be waiting for me. Maybe angry, maybe ready for another confrontation. But they had no idea what I was bringing back with me. An ultimatum that would shatter their world completely. The ending waiting for them inside that living room would be the most terrifying moment of their lives. And this time I would not give them a single chance to beg. I stepped through the front door just as darkness settled outside. Melissa and Ryan were already sitting at the dining table in the living room. Their faces were cold and expressionless. Silence hung over the house like a storm seconds away from breaking. The moment I set my suitcase down, Ryan shot to his feet. A smug grin spread across his face. He said my little vacation was over, and it was time for me to return to reality. Then he started talking about an appointment he had arranged for the following week with an assisted living facility. According to him, it was the best place for me now. Melissa slid a prepared document across the table toward me. All I needed to do, she said, was sign the papers agreeing to sell the house. Strangely enough, I felt completely calm. The anger from previous days had disappeared. In its place was the cold certainty of a carpenter preparing to cut away rotten wood. I never even looked at the papers. Instead, I slowly opened my leather briefcase and removed the thick legal file stamped with the red seal of Leonard Harris's law office. Then I placed it directly on the table and pushed it toward Melissa. My voice remained calm, but every word carried the weight of iron. Read page 3 carefully. Melissa frowned as she opened the file. Ryan leaned closer beside her, and the second their eyes landed on the legal language, the entire room froze. Melissa's face drained of color. Her hands started trembling. The documents clearly stated that ownership of the house and inheritance rights had been transferred to my grandson Noah. Melissa had been completely removed. And beneath that was the clause establishing my absolute authority over all financial and property decisions while still alive. No outside interference. No guardianship manipulation. No control. Melissa suddenly burst into tears. She screamed, asking how I could take away what belonged to her. She kept repeating that she was my only daughter. Then she accused me of being manipulated by outsiders. Ryan lunged forward as if he wanted to snatch the documents away, but my hand slammed down firmly on top of them first. I looked directly into the eyes of the two people unraveling in front of me. Then I delivered the ultimatum. You have 90 days to pack your belongings and leave this house. Melissa broke down completely. She begged me not to throw my own daughter out into the street. She pleaded for compassion, for family, for forgiveness. Slowly, I stood up, and I looked at the daughter I once loved with every piece of my heart. Then I spoke with absolute certainty. Love and boundaries can exist in the same room, I said quietly. But respect is not negotiable. The room fell silent again. You chose control over love, I continued. Now you will live with the consequences. Ryan exploded with rage. He slammed both hands against the table and shouted that I would regret everything. He swore I would die alone inside this empty house with nobody left to care for me. But the threats no longer touched me. That same night they began throwing their belongings into suitcases. The sound of rolling luggage echoed violently through the hallway. Hours later I stood beside the living room window and watched their car disappear into the darkness. And for the first time in years, the house finally belonged to me again. The silence afterward felt almost unreal, peaceful, sacred. But just as the last sound of the car vanished into the night, I heard something else. A strange noise, coming from the basement storage room. Like something hidden beneath the floor was trying to speak to me. Or perhaps, like one final message Margaret had left behind waiting for me to find it. I hurried down the steep basement stairs toward the sound beneath the house. The steady tapping echoed from the dark corner behind my workbench. I shoved several cardboard boxes aside, and suddenly my heart tightened. Noah, my 10-year-old grandson, was crouched on the basement floor, holding a leftover piece of walnut wood in one hand and a small metal tool in the other. He was tapping against the grain, imitating the sound of my hammer. The moment he looked up at me, his eyes were clear and fearless. I don't want to go with them, he whispered. My chest froze. I want to stay here with you, Grandpa. He lowered his eyes toward the workbench. I want you to teach me carpentry. Slowly I knelt beside him and placed my hands on his small shoulders. And for the first time in many years, the tears I had buried inside myself finally escaped. Not from pain, not from anger, but from relief. Real relief. This house finally had the right air. Melissa and Ryan left this home driven by greed and control. But without realizing it, they abandoned the greatest treasure of my life. Weeks passed, and the house became quiet again. Not the empty silence of loneliness, but the peaceful silence of healing. Ryan's arrogant shouting disappeared from the hallways. Melissa's constant control no longer poisoned the air. Every evening I sat beside the walnut table I had finished with my own hands. I placed it next to Margaret's striped velvet armchair after bringing it back to its rightful place in the living room. Sometimes when the sunset poured through the windows just right, I almost felt Margaret smiling at us. Noah sat beside me, carefully carving small wooden toys beneath the warm light, and little by little, the man I used to be returned completely. I had rebuilt my life with my own hands. Listen to me carefully. You do not need permission. Not from your children. Not from their spouses. Not from anyone. You already earned the space you occupy in this world. Do not allow anyone to rearrange your life without your consent. If this story helped you find strength inside yourself, share it with someone else who needs to wake up before it is too late. Being 60, 70, or 80 years old does not mean your story is over. Do not let anyone else write the final chapters of your life. Take your life back. Starting today. I looked out the living room window as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. My counterattack was complete. Justice had finally been served. Or at least, that was what I believed. Because when I turned the final page of an old book resting on the walnut table, something slipped loose from the spine and fluttered onto the floor. A small yellowed piece of paper. A handwritten letter. Margaret's handwriting. My breath caught instantly. It was dated shortly before her death. But she had never given it to me. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the fragile paper and began reading the crooked lines of ink, and within seconds the world around me tilted sideways. Because the letter contained a horrifying secret about Melissa's past, a secret Margaret had hidden for 15 years to protect me.